In today's video, we're going to talk about carbohydrates as a macronutrient. We're going to try to dispel some of the misconceptions about carbohydrates and try to, explain how they're actually a necessary component of good nutrition. We're going to try to get you to think about good and bad sources of carbohydrates and ideally steer you towards the good ones. And then we'll give you some easy to remember tips when it comes to getting your carbohydrates every single day. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules. It should be the majority of where we get our energy from. So our daily caloric intake, of that 45 to 65% of our total calories should come from carbs. 1 gram of carbohydrates has 4 kcals or food calories. So when you calculate the number of calories you should be getting every day from carb sources, you would divide that by 4 to figure out how many grams of carbs you should be eating. So carbohydrates fall into 2 predominant categories: simple and complex carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are the monosaccharides and the disaccharides. First, we'll start off with glucose, which is the majority of the sugar that is found in our bloodstream. This is very important if you are at risk or living with diabetes. Fructose is essentially what's found in fruit and honey. Over on the disaccharides, you've got maltose, which is essentially the sugar that is created when we break down starch. So if you eat something with starch, which is the energy source of plants, the saliva in your mouth will actually convert that into maltose. Sucrose is essentially table sugar. Now, one interesting fact is that in the United States, only sucrose can be called sugar. All other types of sweeteners, which are sources of carbohydrates, cannot be called sugar, and so whenever you see the label sugar-free on some kind of a package, immediately you should become a little bit suspicious that they're trying to peddle something as healthy or low calorie, but all they're potentially doing is replacing sucrose with some other type of sugar. And then lactose, that's a component in milk sugar. So people who are lactose intolerant, they don't have the enzyme that will break down lactose. In general, anytime you see OSC, that is a type of sugar, and ACE is the enzyme that breaks down that type of sugar. Oftentimes an enzyme is a protein. So people who are lactose intolerant don't have the enzyme lactase that breaks down lactose. The other category of carbohydrates are the complex carbs. And you may have heard that it's probably a good idea to get more complex carbs into your diet. The first type of complex carb is glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose, which was a simple carbohydrate. It's a storage form of glucose in animals. So we store glycogen in our liver, and that's basically how we store glucose. Now plants, they store their glucose in the form of starch. And if you remember from the simple carbohydrates, when we chew and we actually break down something with starch with our saliva, we create maltose. All right. Fiber. Now fiber, we don't really break it down, and it comes in 2 forms, soluble and insoluble. We still want to get fiber in our diet because it does serve a number of benefits. First one is that soluble fiber, which we get through nuts and berries and legumes, it helps us feel full. And then insoluble fiber, this is the material in like plants for grains that actually encourages our body to expel waste. So we don't want waste sitting in our body. We want that getting out there, and insoluble fiber helps us expel that. So whole grains, leafy vegetables are great sources of insoluble fiber. So these are examples of foods that have a lot of carbohydrates, but you want to stay away from. So soda goes without saying. It has almost no nutritional value whatsoever. It's just got a lot of sugar and sweeteners. You even want to stay away from diet soda as well. Baked goods like whoopie pies, a lot of trans fats, a lot of empty calories. Even white bread. White bread is oftentimes highly processed. Carbohydrates in there, but not a lot of nutrition. Definitely, you're not getting some of the benefits that you would get from whole grains like the fiber and the insoluble fiber. Candy bars, again. This one is a little bit surprising to a lot of people. A lot of cereals are touted as being healthy alternatives for breakfast, but in reality, they tend to have a lot of sweeteners and really don't have a lot of the nutritional benefits of a more natural breakfast with fresh fruits and berries. Specialty drinks. This one definitely surprises people. So oftentimes it's part of an afternoon ritual or a morning ritual to go and get a drink from one of the coffee franchises out there. And you want to really be careful because we're thinking it's a caffeine or a coffee-based derivative, but some of these drinks oftentimes will have a lot of fat, somewhere on the order of 800 calories, especially when you think about some of the sizes. In America, we like to get large sizes of food items, and so you really want to think about what you're ordering. A black cup of coffee, that's fine. Not a lot of calories, a pretty good option. But some of these specialty drinks that are blended with sweeteners and creams, a lot of empty calories and very little nutritional value. Health bars. Also, another example of a packaged food that has a lot of misleading health benefits. They're oftentimes conveyed as being a very good source of protein. They're in the health food section, but oftentimes a lot of sweeteners, a lot of empty calories, and sometimes there's just so much protein that your body can't even consume most of that protein as well. So definitely look carefully at the labels of a lot of these health bars. Another source of empty calories that with no nutritional value are condiments and sauces. So barbecue sauce is an example of a sauce that we don't really think too much about that oftentimes has a lot of calories because of all the sweeteners that are added to it. The same thing applies for salad dressings as well too. You can make a salad dressing that tastes just as great at home without all the unnecessary sweeteners. So in general, these are examples of food items that you want to try to minimize or avoid altogether. These are the bad choices when it comes to getting your daily carbohydrate intake. So now that we showed you the bad, we're going to show you some examples of good food items that can give you the carbohydrates that you need. So legumes like beans, apples, nuts and berries, low-fat yogurt, whole grain bread, green leafy vegetables, avocados. These are all examples of food that will have the carbohydrates that you need. It will give you the energy in a consistent fashion so that you're not having those spikes that leave you exhausted in the middle of the afternoon. But they're also good sources of fat and protein as well. And that's the mark of a good food item, or a good way to essentially feed yourself, is that the item is going to give you not just one, but multiple macronutrients, as well as the micronutrients, like the vitamins and the minerals that we'll get into in other videos. And what's good about these is that they're oftentimes readily available. There's nothing in here that you can't get in your local grocery store. And the supermarket industry is actually getting better at providing more variety of these things. Now, I know that for some people, they look at these types of foods and they're like, it's not as appetizing. Give me my barbecue sauce and give me my health bars. But the truth is, there are a lot of recipes that we can learn to make these types of food items taste very good, and actually can do it in a very convenient fashion. So we want to right now just get you to think about good sources of carbohydrates versus bad, and we can get more into what are some tips and strategies so that you can put more of these good sources of carbs into our daily diet. In recent years, there's been a lot of talk and diet philosophies that focused on really going extreme in terms of removing carbs from our diet. The problem with anything extreme is that it can lead to malnutrition. I mean, at the end of the day, carbs are where the majority of our energy should come from. If you get too little carbs, then basically your body is going to start breaking down itself. It's going to start breaking down body tissue like muscles to go ahead and give it the energy that it needs. And that's not good. It's not as efficient as using carbohydrates for energy. And another downside to this is that some of these diets encourage a lot of protein consumption, and there's an opportunity to just get way too much sodium, especially if you're getting your protein in the form of cold cuts, preserved meats, and also saturated fat, which has been linked to cardiovascular disease. So that's one of the drawbacks of taking such an extreme position on getting your carb intake. Now again, not all carbs are created equal. Getting bad carbs, from bad food choices is bad for you as well. But you really want to have a healthy amount of carbohydrates in your diet. So we're going to leave you with some easy to remember tips when you are eating, so that you are getting not only enough carbohydrate, but also you're getting it from better choices. So the first one is, try to get half of your foods, the food that you're taking in on a daily basis, try to get it in fruit and veggie form. Ideally, you want to really kind of load up on the veggies. It's hard to go wrong with consuming vegetables. Try to eat your carbs with some type of lean protein, and make sure you're getting some type of good dietary fat that's low in saturated fat. So an example of a lean protein could be some egg whites for breakfast. It could be some poultry like chicken breast or turkey for lunch. Don't go crazy on the protein, and we'll talk more about what the right amount of protein is. But essentially, try to get your carbs with some type of lean protein and some kind of low-fat dairy if you're not vegan, so that you're getting all the macronutrients together and you're feeling full. Learn to flavor with spices, not sweeteners. So if you remember, barbecue sauce, these salad dressings that you're buying off the shelf oftentimes have a lot of artificial and unnecessary sweeteners. You can make some phenomenal dishes using spices, and that doesn't necessarily mean things that are going to be hot. There's a lot of spices that are very aromatic. A lot of the Mediterranean spices like rosemary and oregano just give a wonderful bouquet to food, and they give you the flavor so that you don't feel like you're making a sacrifice with every single meal. And probably the easiest thing to implement is just drink water. There's way too much, the beverage industry in this country is just massive. There are so many sugary beverages, and we're not just talking about soda here. A lot of the fruit juices on shelves today don't even have that much natural juice in them, and have things like fructose corn syrup and other types of sweeteners. You really can't go wrong if, when you're thirsty, just drink water. And you'll find that will reduce the number of unnecessary carbs and calories in your diet significantly.